basically what happened here is once President Donald Trump made a decision that the war in Gaza had to end, it ended. This is the bottom line of the whole story. We've been waiting for this moment for a very long time because Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to end the war, and that was a condition of Hamas to return all the hostages. Hamas was willing, even from a year ago, to return all the Israeli hostages, but they demanded that there be a full end of the war and a full ceasefire and a withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. It was only after the Israeli failed assassination attempt in Doha of the Hamas leadership that Donald Trump made the decision that this war is too dangerous to the interest of the United States in the region, and it had to end. And we saw Donald Trump call Netanyahu to the Oval Office after the UN General Assembly meeting, where he handed Netanyahu the phone and ordered him to call the Qatari Prime Minister and apologize for the Israeli attack. And then when all the cameras left the room, Trump told Netanyahu it's time to end the war. When the US dictated the terms, announced that Netanyahu had agreed, which locked him into it. Then the task was to lock Hamas into the agreement. And they got the Qataris, the Egyptians, and they brought in the Turkish intelligence to put the full court press on Hamas. And even when Hamas answered yes, but Trump issued on his Truth Social, Hamas said yes, locking them into the deal. Then it was just a matter of the technicalities of getting them together in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, putting them in the rooms parallel to each other and closing the deal. Because the deal was written already a long time ago.
These are obviously complex negotiations that were going on, and there's a lot of different moving parts here. Was there a particular moment that stood out to you? Was there a moment where you felt confident that the agreement was going to finally get over the line?
Well, the first time that I felt confident that it was going to get over the line was on September 8th when Mr. Witkoff called me late in the evening and told me that the Qatari Prime Minister was sitting with the Hamas negotiating team and just handed them the final version of the American proposal. But the next day was the Israeli bombing in Doha and the attempt to kill the Hamas negotiating team. And then there was a breakdown. Hamas went into paralysis. They scattered. They were behind closed doors and they weren't using their phones. It was at the point that Trump made the decision to end the war. It was difficult to renew the communication with Hamas and to pass on message to them. But that eventually happened about 10 days later, even though the day after the bombing, one of the Hamas members called me and told me that they were going to be off communication. They were staying behind in rooms closed with their phones off. So that's what happened, and Witkoff played the deal very well. He contacted, together with President Trump, the Qatari Prime Minister, President Sisi from Egypt, the President Erdogan from Egypt, from Turkey, and got all the players involved directly in communication with Hamas.
Gershon, talk us through the conditions that these hostages would have been living in now over the past 2 years.
Well, from what we've seen from the videos that have been released by Hamas over the last months, we've seen Israeli hostages, young men mostly, who have been starved almost to death. They skin and bones, living in tunnels 30, 40, 50 meters underground with very limited water, fresh water, very limited sanitation, and very sparse food. What we've seen are people who look like victims of the concentration camps of World War II. Hamas has claimed that they take good care of the hostages, but our visual evidence of that is completely the opposite. So we don't know what we're going to see when these people come out of the tunnels. They've been in captivity for more than 2 years now, most of the time underground in tunnels with very low quality oxygen and very damp conditions, cold, lack of food, lack of water. It'll be very difficult to see them. I'm sure that Hamas is giving them food, but they have to be very careful. In fact, some of the Israeli medical professionals put out in the media that Hamas should not give them an extra amount of food right now because that would endanger their health. Bringing people back from starvation is a slow process. It has to be done carefully with real medical advice and direct involvement of medical professionals.
During the initial celebrations, obviously the families of a lot of these hostages were elated with the news that they were going to see their loved ones again. But there were a lot of former hostages who were taking a very cautious approach. They were saying until the moment we see them get into that, the Red Cross vehicles and they're brought over the border and they're reunited with their loved ones, that's the moment where they're going to be at ease. Is that the right approach here, seeing that there are so many different ways that this could go wrong?
Yeah, this is the Middle East, and we nothing's done until it's done. In addition to the 20 living hostages who are believed to be living, there are another 28 hostages who are deceased, and it's not clear that Hamas knows where all of them are located, and they are obligated to bring them all back. There's been an international mechanism created between Israel, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey to help locate those bodies. And the mechanism is really to ensure that if Hamas is not capable of delivering all the 28 deceased hostages, that it won't be used as a alibi or excuse for Israel to renew the war. They want to demonstrate that Hamas is actually doing everything in its power to locate the 28 dead bodies. And this is very important to the families in Israel to bury their loved ones as well, not only receiving the live hostages back. Many of the parents have said it feels like I'm giving birth again. This is a lot of what the mothers have said. Certainly for the 28 families who are going to be burying their loved ones, it's a completely different emotion, yet it is a closing of a circle in a kind of way, being able to bury your son, your parent, your spouse.
Seeing how chaotic some of the handovers were in the past, will the hostage handover be different to what we've seen previously this time around?
There was an Israeli insistent that there won't be any of those terrible ceremonies that Hamas did, and Hamas agreed to those conditions. The Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, is already gearing up to deal with the logistics of bringing back the hostages, the living and the deceased. And the International Committee of the Red Cross is going to also be involved on the Israeli side at the Israeli prisons to retrieve the 2,000 Israeli Palestinian prisoners who will be released in the deal after the hostages are returned to Israel.
You touched on it before. Of course, there are about 28 other hostages that are believed to have been deceased. Talk us through the importance of also having them return to Israel.
Well, for Israeli families, for Jewish people, having a grave is very, very important. I remember one of the Israeli negotiators once asked me if Hamas would be willing to change bodies for bodies, knowing the importance of deceased bodies to be buried in Israel. The Hamas people told me, no, it's not so important for us. From our perspective, they're already in heaven, and their bodies are buried in Palestine, even if you call it Israel. But for Israeli Jews, the return of the body and having a grave to mourn at, to be able to sit in mourning for 7 days, as Jewish law commands, is very important in this country, and very important, I think, for Jewish people in general. I'm sure it's important for people of other religions as well, and anyone who's lost a son, a brother, a father, an uncle, wants to have a grave or some kind of place to memorial their lives.
Gershon Baskin, a former hostage negotiator and Israeli peace activist, joining us there from Jerusalem. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.